Hey everybody, DM Galabond here, and this week we're going to do something a little bit different on our weekly video. We are going to go a little in-depth and talk to you about how I built a monster for one of my long-running campaigns, the Walker of Waterdeep. Now I'm going to go ahead and get out of here and so let you see these slides here. What we're going to focus on is we're going to focus on how I converted a specific monster, the Skaab Goliath, for my party to fight when they went to the plane of Innistrad. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the philosophy of how I do monster conversions, why it works for my campaign. This is not to try to tell you that you should or have to do the same thing that I do, because especially if you're running a homebrew planeswalking campaign, your homebrew planeswalking campaign is going to be different than any other homebrew planeswalking campaign. That means that something that another DM does is not going to necessarily work for your campaign. And something that you do that works in your campaign is not necessarily going to work for somebody else. But this is one idea, one approach, one way that you can look at converting monsters from Magic the Gathering for use in a D&D campaign. Alright, so in my Walker of Waterdeep campaign, a major theme for this campaign is letting the party fight against monsters that get pulled straight out of Magic the Gathering. So my goal when I create these fights for them is I want to create challenging encounters that have really cool monsters in them. I want to make the fights feel authentic to the game of Magic the Gathering. Now, what lends to that authenticity? Well, in my mind, give the monsters abilities and features that feel like they are those from the expansion or block of whichever plane we happen to be in at the time. Another thing is when you're putting multiple monsters out on the field for the party to face, I want to build synergies in the encounter the same way that creatures in a deck, when you're playing Magic the Gathering, will build synergies. You know, you put out one monster, and then you put out another monster that buffs other monsters, or when you put out a certain kind of monster, these other monsters get certain added abilities or certain bonuses or buffs or whatever to them. So then I also want to challenge the party by adding immunity or resistance to favorite damage types or favorite tactics, because the party that I am running this game for, those players, for the most part, they're quite experienced players, and that means that they really understand each other's characters and strengths well. And so as they have developed their characters, they have sort of built in synergies with different spells that ones have or different abilities that others have. And so they sort of play off of each other that way. So I want to try to take some of those favorite tricks away from them and then keep changing that up. Don't just keep hammering on the same thing, because then they'll just change their tactics. I want to sort of keep them guessing what this next fight is going to be like. And then last but not least, tune the fights to challenge but not to overwhelm the PCs. The players have invested a lot of time, a lot of hours, a lot of thought, a lot of backstory, and they have developed rich threads, tendrils that reach out to different NPCs on several other planes. And so I don't want to just simply do a TPK and throw away all of that work that they have done, or make them feel like they have to go and find somebody who can resurrect their character. I don't want to do that to them. That just seems overly punitive. So I want the fights to be challenging, but at the end of the day, I want to make them so that they can prevail. But I want them to feel like if they screw up, if they're off their game, they very easily could have a character or multiple characters die in the campaign. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm pushing for in my game. Now, of course, your table could be completely different. And this is why I say what works at my table may not work at your table. All right, so I've told you a little bit about the philosophy of what I'm going for. Now let me take you through some of the steps that I go through in general to build a monster out of Magic the Gathering for D&D 5e. All right, the very first thing I do is I go to the Gatherer tool. The Gatherer tool is a great resource, a website created by Wizards of the Coast, and it's basically a database of every single Magic the Gathering card that has ever been released, all indexed and sorted by the release, by the expansion, by the type of card, by the color. Every way you can think of, they allow you to sort those cards. So I go down to the block or to the specific expansion, and I look for creatures out of that. And then I just look for things that kind of look cool or that seem to fit the theme of what we are going to be doing in that particular plane, because there is a loose story that I like to tell in every plane that we go to. There's a reason they're going to that plane. There is a mission or a purpose that they have to fulfill there. And then there are different things that go on. And in some cases, they discover that there's things that they have to do before they can do what they came here to do, because the plane is all screwed up and what they need to do can't be done until these other things get done. There are other times that they go to a plane, they have a specific purpose, and there's interesting things going on, and they can either choose to do those interesting things or they can choose to skip them and just focus on what they came for. So I like to give them a little bit of choice either way. So because I think that kind of makes it fun more fun for the players, more fun for me. After I select the creatures, then I want to determine the CR, and I determine the CR based on the converted mana cost, so the total casting cost, and the toughness of the creature. So once I've determined the CR, then I look for how many attacks a creature is going to have. And the number of attacks, that's based on the power of the card. And then I like to determine special damage types and resistances, and those are usually based on the mana color, although sometimes they are based on the creature type. And this particular monster we're going to talk about tonight is one of those where it was based more on the creature type than the mana color. All right, then when you're doing that conversion, I don't like to build everything from the ground up. I always like to find a template that already exists for a monster in D&D 5e, and then, find one that's at least close, and then take this monster, lay it over the top of it. Then I do tweaking to suit my specific campaign. That is, suit the strengths and weaknesses of the players, the strengths and weaknesses of the PCs, that synergy that I talked about that they have developed around the table with each other. And once again, it bears repeating. Homebrew is never one size fits all. What works in my campaign may not work in yours. What works in your campaign is almost certainly not going to work for other DMs in another campaign, even if their homebrew setting is very similar to yours. The specific group of players you have, the specific way they have built their characters, the specific themes you are going for in your game, going to be completely different than what some other DM is going to do. And so you can't just go and say, oh, well, this DM did this, let me just take that and put it into my game, because it's either going to feel very alien to you and to the players, it's going to feel like it doesn't fit, or it's going to make things a lot less enjoyable because it's either way too easy or it's way too hard. And so you've got to sort of find your own way, but you can take inspiration from what other DMs do. I do that all the time. I say that I steal ideas. Well, what I really do is I steal inspiration from something I see this DM do. Oh, I'd like to do something like that. But because of the way my table works, I can't do exactly what they're doing. So I wind up twisting what they do to make it work in my game. That's really what you have to kind of do in your homebrew campaign as well. All right, so we've looked at how I build monsters in general. Now let's take a look at this specific monster, the Skaab Goliath. How did I build the Skaab Goliath out of Magic the Gathering for D&D 5e? Well, I had to think about what role do I want this monster to play. I wanted this to be a solo monster that the party would face when they were at the Cecani estate. Gisa and Geralf Cecani, the two corpse stitchers that are part of lore of the Innistrad release, they are, batshit crazy brother and sister that dig up corpses and make awful kinds of undead monstrosities out of them. So I wanted this to be something that the party would encounter and have to fight. Now, the lore in my game, not necessarily in Magic the Gathering, but the lore in my game is that this particular Skaab Goliath was Geralf Cecani's pet named Fluffy. Now, why did I call it Fluffy? Well, part of it goes back to the Cecani, brother and sister, being crazy, but also it goes back to Innistrad just being so dreary and dark. In Innistrad, the hope that people live for is that after they die, they stay dead. Because there's so many undead, there's so many vampires, so many lycanthropes, so many awful necromancers, so many demons, and I mean it's just a really dark and twisted place, and everything there is trying to kill you. So I wanted to put a little bit of humor in it by having, and also reflect the insanity of the Cecani brother and sister, by saying that Geralf would name his Skaab Goliath Fluffy. All right, so the immediate goal is that this Skaab Goliath was supposed to beat down the party and soften them up so that the Cecanis could capture them. That's kind of what I was going for. That's what I hoped would happen in the plot of the story. And then the longer term goal is I wanted to make Gisa and Geralf Cecani enemies that the party was going to hate. I mean, I just wanted them to be so sickened about just the pure evil and sadistic pleasure that this brother and sister get from inflicting, their twisted experiments on the dead and then throwing those at living people. It's just, I just wanted them to want to end these guys. So that was the whole reason I wanted to put the Skaab Goliath in the campaign at the point I wanted to put him there. We talked a little bit about the role it would play, where it would appear, and why it would be there. But now I want to dig into the mechanics a little bit. So what did I decide the CR was going to be, and how did I arrive at it? Well, I talked about how I take the total casting cost, and that is 6. So it's 5 of any color and then 1 of blue. And then I add that converted mana cost to the toughness, which is 9. So 6 and 9, that gives you a 15. That is my target CR for looking at monsters in D&D. So I want to kind of look in the range of a CR 15 monster to see if there's something I can find in or about that CR that is going to be the template that I'm going to build the D&D version of the Skaab Goliath on. Then I try to figure out how many attacks this is going to have. The power is 6, so rough algorithm I built for myself is that something that has a power of 6, that has a multi-attack that's usually either 2 attacks or 3 attacks per round. Now in this case, it was going to be 2 attacks because CR 15 is technically a little higher than what the party is supposed to be able to face. However, I was confident that my party could take a CR15 if it was a solo. But I wanted to make sure that I only gave it the 2 attacks around instead of the 3, because the 3 might be a little overkill. Then, what kind of immunities is it going to have? Those are partly dictated by the creature type or the mana color, and partly dictated by which one of the party members do I want to screw with. In this case, the undead, they already have a number of immunities, but then I also said, all right, I am going to give this Goliath immunity to necrotic damage. I'm also going to give it immunity to the stunned condition. Now, the cleric has a very powerful damage spell that uses necrotic damage, so I took that away from him. And the monk, who has multiple attacks, one of his tactics in battle is to find the toughest opponent and go attack it with his melee attacks and flurry of blows, and in the first round, every attack he tries to get that stunning strike on. Because if you can land that stunning strike, it totally takes a turn away, and then everybody else can dogpile that monster and burn it down rather quickly. So I wanted to take away their ability to use a stun to take the Goliath out of the fight, because it's a solo monster. It makes the fight way too easy. You don't want it to be able to be stunned. And then also that necrotic damage, okay, I want to make you work a little bit harder to get this guy down. All right. So then the special damage it is going to deal, well, because it's undead, it's going to deal necrotic damage. And then looking through D&D for something that's undead and something that is at or close to the CR15 target, I came up with the Mummy Lord. So the Mummy Lord became the template that I built the Skaab Goliath on. Alright, now we're going to take a look at some of the modifications I made when I was converting that monster so that it would pose a challenge for my players at my table. All right, so we talked about how I built the Skaab Goliath on the template, or the chassis, if you will, of the Mummy Lord. So what tweaks did I make from that? Well, I did a flavor tweak. So it's Rotting Fist attack. I changed that to be a Corrupting Fist attack. And that meant, I think it was actually using still the same type of damage, but, and of course it wasn't going to then turn it into a mummy if it died from mummy rot. So it was corrupting damage instead of mummy rot that the target would get. Then I changed the blinding sand feature to a blinding slime feature, and it still had the same effect of blinding the target, but instead of spraying sand, it would spray kind of like a bloody muck, like gore or stuff like that. Because this is the Skaab Goliath is a fleshy, kind of fresher undead, and so it's just like as it kind of moves and squeezes, all this blinding gore would just shoot out of the thing. Okay. The Whirlwind of Sand feature, I changed that to be a Whirlwind of Flesh. And again, that's just a flavor change. The effect is still the same, the Whirlwind of Sand and the Whirlwind of Flesh, but it's a flavor difference because the Cecani estate, at least where I put it, it's out in the middle of a swamp, and there's not a bunch of desert sand around, so it doesn't make sense to have it be a Whirlwind of Sand. Then, because it was a solo monster, I also beefed up its health. You may think, whoa, adding 150 hit points to it, so it's like it becomes like a 247 hit point monster. But the reason I did that is because the PCs in my campaign, they hit really hard. The Barbarian, when he gets a critical with his magical weapon, especially if it's a critical against an undead, he is capable of doing 60 points in a single hit. I didn't want to make it too easy for them to take this thing down, for it to die too quickly. I wanted it to be a big, huge bucket of hit points that they were all going to have to beat on for a while before they could finally wear it down. Because I beefed up its hit points, I did not change its armor class or the damage per attack. This is a mistake that I think is a temptation for some DMs to make. If you're going to homebrew something and you think, well, this monster has to be a little tougher, I'm going to beef up the HP and the AC and the damage per attack. Well, if you start doing that, then you start making the monster overpowered for your PCs. So once again, the goal is to make the fight challenging, not to have a TPK. I did give it a slight boost in its attack bonus. The Mummy Lord normally has a +9 on its attack bonus, but I gave the Skaab Goliath a +11 instead of a +9. Now again, why does that work at my table? Well, because their PCs are kind of in an arms race to get the highest possible AC they can get. I have one PC in the party that is an AC 25. I have 2 other PCs in the party that are AC 20 or higher. And then I think the lowest AC in the entire party is an AC 17. So if I want to hit on a more consistent basis, then the attack bonus has to be dialed up a little bit. So this monster needs to be a threat. It can't just be sitting there flailing and hitting air all the time while the party is connecting against the monster. The monster has to be a credible threat, has to be landing a sufficient number of its spell and range and melee attacks. So that's why I tend to give things a little bit of an attack bonus. But once again, you'll notice I don't change the damage per attack. I leave that the same. I don't increase that, but I make it just a little bit easier for the monster to hit the PCs. All right. And then from the Mummy Lord template, 2 things I did keep and did not change. I kept its spell casting capability, and I didn't really even feel like I had to change out any of the spells that the Mummy Lord gets. And I also kept its vulnerability to fire. It's an undead, so I went ahead and let it have the vulnerability to fire. All right, so what happened when they got to the Cecani estate and they fought this Skaab Goliath? Well, I was pretty happy with how the fight went, and I think the players were pretty happy with it too. The fight turned out to be a hard-earned victory for the PCs. Why was it hard-earned? Well, 3 of the 5 party members were bloodied, which is that you're half hit points or below. A lot of them had taken damage from this enemy. 1 party member had actually taken so much damage they were unconscious, and they had been knocked out of the fight in the last round before the party ended, or party won. And then 4 of the 5 casters in the party had less than 3 spell slots left because they had burned so many spells trying to hit this thing and trying to get through some of its resistances and overcome some of its immunities. What that meant is that the party was in no shape to fight when Geralf and Gisa and Gisa's pet Skaab Goliath appeared. Because, yes, in my game, both of the siblings have a pet Skaab Goliath. And this was the welcoming committee that was a solo when they fought it. After they just barely beat this thing and they're all bloodied and battered and bruised and out of resources, well, now another one comes up along with the 2 people that created them. And then just to give a little bit of a sense of the type of people they were dealing with, the first thing that happened is that Geralf, of course, completely ignores the party and runs over and starts crying, kneeling down over Fluffy, going, "Oh no, he's hurt! You destroyed! You killed him!" And Gisa just laughs at him because his Goliath got destroyed, and it's like the party is just, what the hell is wrong with these people? So so it gave them a good sense of what kind of people Gisa and Geralf were, and it gave the party a really good test. And I realized, okay, there was a boss fight that I had planned for a little bit later on in the campaign, and it's like, okay, maybe the way I have that boss now is a little bit overpowered because this one was so tough. So I had to go in and actually tweak and dial that one back a little bit so that they could get out of that fight without losing their PCs. That is really it. That's all I wanted to talk about today, is how I built this monster, why I built this monster this way, and what the results of doing it this way were in my campaign. Now, certainly, I wouldn't recommend that you follow exactly the same process and do that for your table, because your players may have more synergy, and the monster that I tell you to create might be too weak for them. Or your players may not be as experienced, and they may not understand the synergy of working together and playing off of each other's abilities as well. And you may wind up just having a TPK on your hands if you did conversions the way that I do. So, just an idea that you have, and maybe there's something about the way I have created these monsters, or this monster in particular, that you can pull when you are doing your own planeswalking homebrew campaign, and it might give you some inspiration. And if it does, I'd love to see that in the comments. So please let me know about that. All right, I'm going to get out of here. I've taken up enough of your time. Thank you for spending a little bit of time with us today. Please remember, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, click the post notification bell so that you hear every time a new piece of content drops on the channel. And we hope that we will see you back. And then come join us for some of our live streams that we do. All right, everybody, take care. Have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful weekend. Good night, and we'll talk to you later.